Welcome to Command Control Power, Apple Tech Support and Business Talk, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over a decade, we've released weekly episodes featuring real-world stories from the front lines of tech support, in-depth discussions about managing clients and businesses, and conversations with fellow consultants and industry partners. What you're about to hear is a best-of episode originally broadcast on December 4th, 2018, a classic installment from our archives. To hear our latest regularly recorded episodes, you'll need to subscribe to our Patreon-exclusive podcast feed. Designed specifically for Apple IT professionals, this private feed dives deeper into the challenges of running your consultancy, supporting your clients, managing staff, and maintaining large device fleets. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll gain access to a rich library of bonus content, exclusive interviews, and insights you won't find anywhere else. To subscribe, simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now, on to the show.
So as we were prepping for this show, Joe, you had reached out to me, and this has been a pretty typical thing since you've been on the road, that you were finishing up a live session remote with a client, and you were lining up another one, and you were in between sessions. Just for my own curiosity, and probably people listening to the show as well, how does that work? It almost seems to me like, and you tell me if this is correct, you could present it as a benefit. In the case of working remotely, you could work more efficiently. It's not like they have to entertain you in their own home or their own business. So you could kind of get in and out and probably save them money. But I would think at other times, there must be just the natural difficulties that we all have with doing remote sessions and getting reliability with products like TeamViewer. And so How has that been going?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, certainly I've had my fair share of annoyances with TeamViewer, and those issues seem to start in the last few months. And we talked a little bit about this recently on the show. I think a lot of people have seen this. You'll connect to a machine you have unattended access using TeamViewer, and you'll just see a black screen. And, TeamViewer is like thinking everything's hunky-dory and it's perfectly happy. You're connected. It's like, I've done my job, have at it. And you're just sitting there looking at like what would normally be a, TeamViewer window into the remote Mac, but it's just showing a black screen. And the weird thing is, on the other side, it's like, my impression is it's not waking up the screen. Like it's not displaying video correctly. I'm not positive if there is something being displayed on the other side in any cases, but I think it happens more often than not when a machine has been either sleeping or the screen has just been sleeping.
Right.
And you connect to it. And I give one workaround, which for me, I know, Jerry, you tried this live, I think, on the show when I brought this up. For me, it seems to work very reliably. And I know for you had a couple of issues with it, but I would encourage you to try it again. Basically, you just go up to the TeamViewer Actions menu in the TeamViewer window. You would then choose from the Lock Computer submenu, you just choose Lock. So you go to Actions, Lock Computer, and you choose Lock. And what it does is it just kicks you out to the login window. The result for me is like I go from a black screen to seeing very briefly what should have been on the screen, except it was black. And then from there, it immediately switches to the login window. And then I just click on the username and I type in the password and I'm back in. So that will sort of revive that kind of situation. Other than that, I mean, yeah, there's cases where TeamViewer crashes on the remote side and needs to be reopened and whatever. But for the most part, it's been reliable enough. I keep using it. And as you put it, I think this still stands. How did you put it, Jerry?
VNC client that you love to hate. TeamViewer.
Yeah.
Sign up now.
Right. Trademark. Yeah. That still stands. I've definitely, experienced that. And I agree. It's like, it's kind of a necessary evil. But I remember the days when I got started 15 years ago where there was no remote support software, or if it was probably way too slow and whatever else. And so remote support was like talking the client through the mental model that you have in your head for what they're probably seeing, and then you're trying to like ask them what they're seeing and they're giving you some feedback. And it's like, I don't know what screen they're on now. At least, we don't have to live through that anymore. We have like legitimate remote support software, and it really has changed the whole game for me. Part of what gave me sort of like confidence in the ability to keep doing this work from afar was the fact that I had really become very accustomed to doing a lot of things remotely for at least the last, I don't know, like probably 5 or 10 years even. as much as possible. I mean, it's more efficient. Like you were saying earlier, you can get in, you can get out. You don't have to spin the wheels. You don't have to make your way through someone's home or office and say hi to everybody and pet the dog and like all that stuff. Like you just like click a button, you're seeing their screen, maybe make a little bit of small talk and pretty much you're right in. And then you just start working. They're still describing stuff and pretty much I'm looking at the screen like I know exactly where I'm going to go to fix this. And I'll just say to them, do you mind if I drive for a minute? Then I'm in. I'm just working on it. So,
right.
I mean, I love remote support.
Or the dog is doing far worse to you. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So, but how is that presented to this still kind of confuses me. You forgive me, Joe. I'm a simple caveman and your world frightens and confuses me. How is this presented to the client? They probably know you, right? Most clients that you're working with remotely, you're telling me that most of these sessions that you set up, the client is there and you're talking to them on the phone at the same time that you're doing remote support? Or you client's not there and you're defragging the hard drive? How's that working?
Right. There's a mix of both. We do have unattended access to obviously like most machines that are servers, most machines that are in an office environment or any kind of commercial environment. We would have unattended remote access to, most of the end user machines and definitely all the servers in those cases. And we can remote in sometimes after hours, work on stuff that they have queued up for us. They might submit a ticket or we log a ticket. And it's something that would be better for us to do after hours because it doesn't disrupt them. So in the case of maybe a retail store, for example, I actually have one for after we finish recording where I'm upgrading light speed on 2 different servers for a retail store. They have one machine that they use kind of like in a warehouse environment and then one machine that's mobile. And I'll be connecting to both of those machines unattended. It's prearranged with them so they know that I'm connecting after hours and all they need to do is leave the machines open and up and running and I can just remote in and do it. And when they start their day tomorrow, everything's upgraded.
Okay.
And then we usually will plan something like that where there's somebody available for tomorrow morning in case with a major upgrade that they may have follow-up questions and things because they're not live, with us during the appointment. All right, but yeah, it's a mix of both.
Yeah, but just take us through that. I mean, right now it's old hat to you. You've been out on the road how many months now?
It's going on 7 months now. Yeah, it's 7 months, I think, right to the day.
Right. So there was a point where your office manager had dialogue with the client 7 months ago, let's say, and client call that you would have showed up on site and you would have done these things, and now you're doing it over the phone. What I'm driving at is how is that presented to the client? It's not good to focus on the fact that you're thousands of miles away. Probably don't want to mention that as much. So how is it framed, I guess, is what I'm driving at.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, because framing can be everything. If you introduce it as a thing where it's like, well, unfortunately, Joe's not here. He's on, whatever, like he's on a sabbatical or he's on hiatus or neither of which are true. But like, let's say we positioned it wrong and made it sound like this is a compromise because Joe is out to lunch. Like, you're going to get the lesser support of Joe remote. They're going to be like, oh, well, if I'm paying full price, like I really want somebody to be here. Maybe I'll call the next person.
Right.
For us, we do a lot of stuff remotely anyway. That's even, when I was in town over especially the last few years, like 2 to 3 years, I've really stuck more with remote, I think mainly for efficiency, maybe partly because maybe it's just my personality. I'd rather not go on site. I'd rather not leave my office if I didn't have to,
Sure.
And there's like lots of practical benefits for that. There's no travel time. I mean, that could save you an hour of your day easily in a lot of cases. So, I mean, it's way more efficient to be able to do that. And so they got used to it, I think. I just actually hung up with somebody a few minutes ago before we started recording who was saying specifically she really likes the remote support. So even when I was in town, we did a lot of things remotely for her. And now specifically, she wants someone to be able to work with her remotely like this. We do things like I'll help her with Photoshop. We'll take her photos. She's a professional photographer. We'll put her photos on a template we get from Adobe stock photos and lay it out like right on her screen using her copy of Photoshop. And we're doing it live together. And she likes that. And I mentioned to her today, you might be able to find somebody who kind of specializes in Photoshop to do some of these things a little bit more efficiently. I'm not an expert in it. They can probably teach you a little bit better than I can. she was saying to me, it's hard to find someone who gets her and whatever, and who can work remotely. So it was actually something she desired independently. So I think it's the kind of thing where if you position it as something that would benefit the client because it's more efficient, they don't have to make tea for you when you get there. They don't have to like clean up their office when you're coming over, whatever works for the specific client in question, you kind of position it that way that it's to their benefit. And I think once they experience how easy it is for them, I think a lot of clients really like it.
And you've been moving the clients, I guess, to become more accustomed to remote support, probably even before you put together the idea of going on the road, because you just felt like it was a better solution. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. It wasn't any kind of master plan. I think it just fell out of my personality. Like I'd prefer, no offense to any clients who may hear this in the future, but it's like I'd really prefer to work remotely rather than have to see people if I can help it, with exceptions. Like there are some things that are obviously way easier to do in person, and I have no problem with that. I mean, certainly now it's different for me being 100% remote, but back when I was in the office, I would go on site for on-site things like Wi-Fi troubleshooting and whatever else is happening in person. Or if they have 5 iOS devices and 10 Macs, it's just more efficient probably to be there physically. But other than that, yeah, I've really been leaning more toward remote for a long time. So it wasn't something that was like a consequence of me wanting to go on the road. It was something that it really had already been established and enabled me to do this more easily.
And you don't do video with them under most circumstances. It's TeamViewer and it's audio, and you're not using the audio channel through TeamViewer. You're calling them on your phone. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I mean, they sometimes ask about video. Do you want me to FaceTime you? And I'm like thinking, then I have to give you my cell phone number or at least my Apple ID. And I really don't want to do that with clients if I can help it. So it's not something it's like a hard and fast rule that I'll never do, but it hasn't really been necessary. Most of the time people can describe things and I can picture it and I don't really need to necessarily see it.
Plus, you would have to probably put on a shirt or something like that. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'd have to shower that day.
So those nudist colony campgrounds, you got to be careful not doing the FaceTimes.
Right. You got to position your camera so it's not facing out a window. Exactly. You don't want them to see those people walking around outside. Yep.
I'm sure this has happened in the last 7 months where you've had a planned session and things went slightly awry because you needed a pair of hands there, and then you have to kind of fall back 10 yards and do a reschedule with one of your team members on site. Has that happened?
Occasionally that will happen. I can't think of an example where we had to send somebody on site, because we would usually know that kind of thing in advance where there was a chance or a good probability that, somebody would physically need to be there. But there are cases where we've discovered that, this would be more efficient if you actually just bring it to us, bring it to our office. You're running 10/10, whatever situation they're in, like, we're going to get you up to date, but I don't need to spend like 2 hours on the phone with you to do this. If you could just drop it off, it'll be like an hour of labor and you'll be totally up to date and your original problem will be fixed at the same time, where we just say it's more efficient, in that case, cheaper for them. To just drop it off to us. So they bring it to our office and they take care of it there.
Yeah, that must be helpful that you have that bricks and mortar fallback so that you're not having to take some client through updating their OS remotely, where you say, okay, we're going to do these things and then it's going to start to download and on the recovery partition through internet recovery, and then it's going to do this and then call me back. It could be really tedious. So that's great that you're able to defer to having them bring it to your office and your team picks it up, does all the upgrades, and then you're back in business and you work with them, customizing any things that need to be done once the upgrade's taken place.
Right,
okay.
Exactly.
All right, see, you guys get an A+ for organization. I tried to trip you up. I tried to find some chinks in the armor, but it sounds like you got this all worked out. So steady on, Joe.
Thanks, Jerry. Luckily, a lot of the groundwork had been paved, over the years, and I'm totally comfortable with remote. And I knew the main thing I needed was just internet connection, which sometimes that's an issue. And we'll have to literally go to a different place, connect to Wi-Fi or get a better cell signal. There's still hiccups with that. And I mean, even just finding a desk, we don't have a large RV, so we don't have a lot of tables and surfaces to sit and work at. So it's just more the physical concerns of getting set up logistically to to actually work. Provided we have a coffee shop and decent signal, I can pretty much function as efficiently as I did back home from the road, and sometimes even more so, because it just kind of necessitates a certain level of focus and being on top of everything.
Well, if it's any comfort, I'm broadcasting from my lap myself, so
nice.
I think we're two peas in a pod this evening.
Remote changed everything for me. I'm really such a big fan of it. And there's a lot of stuff you have to do on site, like we talked about. And there's a lot of stuff that's more efficient with labor. And it is great to have an office to be able to do that. Does that justify the expense? And for me, I think for the next foreseeable future, maybe 1 to 2 years, having the office is a nice advantage to be able to say we can upgrade this stuff and we can install drives and things. We've also talked about how the writing is on the wall with upgradability. And so down the road, I think it won't make as much sense to actually need a space for people to drop stuff off. And it's a constant process of reevaluating it. And, we're trying to stay hip to that as we go along.
Right. Well, all I can say is when you do remote sessions with me, I just can't believe you're moving my mouse. I just can't. It still makes me thrilled. I can't believe the mouse is moving. The mouse is moving because you're remote. It's amazing, and my mind is blown.
It is so funny. I wonder what's going through their head. Do they think that there's some physical, like the mouse on their desk is like would have to move for that to happen or something? Like, why is that so magical for people? Like, it's all just digital. It's a screen. Like, of course the mouse is moving. I get a kick out of that too.
Yeah,
they love it. So switching gears a little bit, wanted to bring up some recent feedback from listener Tim Hannon. About the Mac Mini. We may have rushed to judge the Mac Mini a little bit quickly. We hedged, and I stand by my personal assessment of, I agreed with you, Jerry, that the Mac Mini doesn't serve as big a role for me or any of my clients as it may once have done. But Tim did point out a few different examples, and some of these we touched on, but he said one good example is a developer who wants an inexpensive but robust Mac for developing an iOS app. Absolutely. I think I mentioned developers specifically. That's a great, use case for it. Home users who might want to run a media server like Plex. I think this has come up on other podcasts, and I forget if you mentioned this, Jerry, or maybe Sam brought this up, but those examples certainly where you might want to run a server of any sort, FileMaker server, I think you mentioned, there are some examples of locally hosted servers that the Mac Mini still does do a good job of running, of course. In my company, Tim actually brought up something that I thought was applicable to me. How about the idea of a bench Mac? I have my office we were just talking about, and we have a few Mac Pros there that, serve various purposes. Maybe we use as a station for data recovery, connect to a remote machine, with a big screen that's on the desk. Down the road, eventually those Mac Pros will be retired and we'll need a new machine. And we'll probably at that point get a 2014 Mac Mini for all I know, because we do tend to run a little behind the curve. But it is nice to know that Apple is supporting the Mac Mini still, and that we'll still have that option down the road to get one of these current Mac Minis if we need it for something like that.
Sure.
But I wanted to just at least bring that up. Tim did submit the feedback, and I think he has a couple good points there. There was one more use after we finished recording our segment about the Mac Mini that we thought was worth mentioning while we're on the topic. And this was something right after we finished recording. I think Sam posted it to our group chat and pointed out that Apple has a whole page about the secret world of Mac Mini. And if you haven't seen these yet, it's really worth checking out. It actually has a couple of quotes from a guy named Brian Stuckey, who used to own Mac Mini Colo, and then I think they were absorbed by Mac Stadium. And I've hosted servers with them over the years. It's a great example of where the Mac Mini is a nice thing to have. That business is highly dependent on the Mac Mini, and a lot of people like to have access to a remote Mac that's hosted in a data center like that. So that's another nice option to have, and fully reliant on the Mac Mini still existing. So I like the fact that Apple still has the Mac Mini, and I take back anything bad I ever said about it.
If you'd like to go back and actually listen to that show, it's show number 285, Mac Mini, Why For Art Thou? And you can hear me bemoan the fact that the iMac was not refreshed. Speaking of iMacs, we have a longtime client, runs a manufacturing company. He had some time home. He had to take a little bit of medical leave of absence, and his iMac that he did have at home was getting a little bit long in the tooth. And full disclosure, he knew that he was buying an iMac that hasn't been refreshed in over 500 days, but he wanted to get a 5K in there so it would be a little bit more responsive for him. So I said, okay, let's get a 5K 27-inch. Don't put a Fusion drive in there, put a 1 terabyte SSD. So it was a custom to order. He said, great. Paid the coin, for whatever that was. It was delivered to him before he was to start his medical procedures. We did a migration assistant from his previous iMac. Went flawlessly. He starts running the new iMac, and it would do a spontaneous shutdown. And the interesting thing about the spontaneous shutdown was when it would come back on, there would be no message that irregular shutdown, do you want to send a report, crash report, nothing. It would just go dark. It just completely shut down. He was telling me that this was happening, and I'm like, oh, that's really weird. So I went over to his home and checked it out, because this is where he had the iMac installed. Went through, the usual suspects, startup daemons, launch items, kernel extensions, all that stuff. Looked for any legacy cruft that could have come over in the migration. Nothing. He was clean. Running a few things that we would normally run, like TeamViewer, and I think he was using Splashtop desktop on his iMac to get back to his one back in the office, but nothing else. I mean, no real things that were red flags. This seems to me like this is just a power supply issue. Ran the hardware test. So the poor guy, he marches it down to the Apple Store, and you already know this story, right? So the Apple Store gives it back to him. Before they give it back to him, they had it for 24 hours, and they said, well, the problem is that you something came in with the account that you migrated, and it's causing it to do this. And he tells me this. I said, oh, what'd they do? Replace the power supply? Are they sending it out? He goes, no, I got it back. You got it back? He says, yeah, and of course, Apple Store, right? They wiped the hard drive, so he's got no data on it, and they told him that this was the problem. I kind of ran it by you guys, and he said, well, I've run it for 4 days. He got back to me today, and it hasn't shut down once. And then all of a sudden, it was shutting down almost consistently on him. He would run it for a couple of minutes and it would go black. He'd reboot. It would come back up. The only way he could get it to come back up was to pull the plug and then reset the power plug. It would come back up. No crash report. He marched it down to the store again. And of course, we didn't do a migration again. We were working with it the way Apple gave it back to us. And in the end, they agreed to replace this custom to order today.
So I'd be curious to hear the follow-up on this when he gets the replacement. First of all, at this point, after a machine has been through so many unexpected shutdowns, whatever the original cause was, I'm sort of not happy with the hardware having been subjected to all of those shutdowns. Mm-hmm. To me, it starts to seem like, I don't know if I trust this thing, because now who knows what else is wrong with it. Power interruption is just not good. So it's good that they're replacing it. But then, of course, if he gets the new one and it's been replaced and the problem continues with an empty machine, presumably they're not going to restore any data, and you probably wouldn't either, at least until you get to see that this is, functioning okay with out of the box. If it does happen as a brand new factory fresh machine, now the replacement for the brand new machine, I would say then it must be environmental. And then what would you make of that? Could it be bad power in the home, some other device that's interfering, like something that's drawing too much current randomly and then causing the machine to shut down? None of those things would explain why there's no crash report. So it's just baffling all around based on the symptoms.
Agreed. Yeah, we did kick that around, dirty power. I tried it in and out of the APC power supply. He's able to monitor the voltage on this piece of power conditioning equipment that he has his TV plugged into, and he was not seeing any fluctuations at all. My gut feeling, it's a power supply issue on the iMac. So it's finally good that they're not going to send it out for repair. They're just going to do a replacement on it. In fact, we do the migration and the problem comes back and it's not that, we'll let you know in the show.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, don't you love the answer from Apple when they say, like, here's your problem right here. It's all this data you've got, right. Don't put any data on it and then you'll be fine. Like, as if that's an answer, or I don't really know what they expect a customer to do. Manually drag and drop specific things from what are the safe areas? Just your desktop? You wouldn't want to bring over your library folder because that could bring the issue back. It's one of those things where, like, yeah, I mean, okay, maybe it's related to software, but isn't that what we're here for? Like, that's now we need to figure out which software it is. Like, that's the point of troubleshooting. So it is pretty funny when they give you back the same machine and say, the problem was the data and we helpfully removed it for you.
Well, it makes you look so bad too, because, your diagnosis is, well, we tried it in a couple of different outlets. Could be dirty power, could be voltage fluctuations, but it sure seems like it's the Mac. Especially having it manifest itself after Apple said, no, it was a migration. Well, first of all, it's your migration assistant, so don't blame us.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it comes back and, Apple says, no, it's the hardware's good, and it hasn't even been bench tested for more than an hour or two. You question how long it's actually been there on the bench because they're trying to push so many machines through the repair at the local store, but it just makes you look bad.
Yeah, it's really true. Also, like you said, with the migration assistant, when people blame migration assistant, I mean, where do you get off blaming migration assistant? You mean out of the box, you answered yes to the question that encouraged you to migrate your data? Like, no, don't be silly. You should have known to decline that, helpful suggestion of migrating your data. It's just silly, and it might lend some fuel to the fire. I think you brought up where people implicate migration assistant in all kinds of things. And some people swear by doing a clean migration. And I do think that probably good to do that from time to time. But I don't think there should be any reason, not to go with the default choice of migrating your data. Like that should not be something that we avoid doing. It's the built-in supported method. So I mean, yes, there could be software that's interfering, but then you need to dig a little bit deeper. So I don't know. I mean, with the fresh machine from Apple, the replacement, hopefully you're just in the clear and it doesn't happen. But if it keeps happening and it's a blank machine, that also confirms that it's environmental. So sometimes you want Apple to go to that step of replacing the machine anyway, because like you said, you've tried multiple outlets, you've eliminated software as the possibility. Yes, it could still be something environmental, but you're Apple, like, can't you just replace the machine? And then that makes my life a lot easier for testing purposes. If it happens again, then we know for sure it's not the machine. If it doesn't happen, hey, you fixed my problem. So, it seems like it's all upside. From Apple's perspective, they keep a customer happy and it probably doesn't cost them that much. From your perspective, it's pretty much the next logical step. So it's nice that they did go eventually to that, but it sounds like it took a little bit of, convincing, and that's pretty much the name of the game, I think, in working with those stores usually.
Yeah, my feedback was from him that it wasn't a very smooth replacement, that he had to really double down on his anger. The other thing that's kind of interesting, too, if you think about it, is that, of course, and again, I'm not an electrical engineer, there is that safety mechanism that's built into the iMacs, and I would imagine other Macs as well, whereas if the voltage dips too low or it gets too high, there's a safety mechanism for it to shut down like this. And I'm wondering, if you've got an iMac, in his case, that's marginal or sort of on the fence with maybe the tolerances of how that was set, or, maybe it's not performing properly. It could be sensing that there's some problem with the voltage and erroneously shutting down.
Yeah, that's certainly possible too. I've seen stuff like that where a machine is not cooling itself properly. And so it does ride a lot closer to that thermal cutoff or whatever it is. I still think, though, like that should be reported somewhere in software. Maybe there's some reason why that's not happening properly. But I do think that should be logged as the shutdown cause when you next start the machine back up. And like you said, you're not getting the report of the improper shutdown, and you should in that case. I guess there's a chance that it's like having that issue, but it's also having an issue where it's failing to like report the reason that it shut off. It's conceivable. But in those cases, then I start to think again about environmental stuff, where is there a heat vent that's blowing directly into the air intake on this machine? So if the room gets cold and the heat turns on, it's lining up exactly with the intake on this machine where, if he happens to be using the machine, all of a sudden it thinks it's able to cool itself off and it's pulling air in, but that air now is hot air. And so the machine, sees that it can't cool itself off and just shuts off.
Or a big rack of ultraviolet grow lights in the basement. A big
Where's this client located again?
Big installation of something, and they're going on and off, and that's what's triggering it. No, I don't know.
Yeah, right, exactly. I've heard stories from our colleagues who say something about every night at 11 p.m., somebody's server turns off unexpectedly. We can't figure out what's going on, and it goes on. And then they eventually figure out that it's the cleaning crew that comes in and, has to plug in the vacuum or turns on the vacuum and it draws too much power or whatever the case is. It's like, it's one of the more interesting parts is like sleuthing out stuff like this, where it may not even be technology related. It may just be something environmental in the sense you have to think outside the box and really, like it reminds me of my client who had keyboards that all stopped working around the same time and they wouldn't work. And I'm like, well, can you charge the batteries or plug it in? And they're like, no, it doesn't have batteries, doesn't plug in. I'm like, what mysterious device is this that they're talking about that doesn't need to be charged and doesn't need to be plugged in? And then I realized, like, is it solar powered? And they're like, yeah, it has one of those little panels like an old calculator has. And I'm like, how old is this keyboard? And I was like, has anything changed? Is there a reason it may not be getting light hitting it? And they're like, well, we just changed our light bulbs for these high efficiency LEDs. And I'm like, bingo, like process, and it's like, keeps it interesting because it's not even technical, really. It's just something, it's like they changed something and they had no idea to expect that they would have these other implications. So I'm on the edge of my seat for this one.
All right. With your clients, a lot of times, you have to look at the house staff, like the butler or the chambermaid or the groundskeeper, right? Because
they have all those positions, filled, right? It's just we've had cases where an employee will leave a company and then everything starts working much better. And we've been chasing down issues like, I don't know, man, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what's going on. We've tried everything. We've eliminated every variable. And like a couple users are still just reporting these weird issues. We've had people report back to us, well, this person is no longer with the company. And we're pretty confident that all the supposed technology issues were more quote unquote user error. They were either like self-sabotaging their own systems or just things like that, where you really do need to have a sense of like who's involved here and what are their roles and what are their incentives. And
ever since Seamus left and he took his BitTorrent server with him, the network's a lot faster now. We can't explain it.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me, we were doing this ARD job for a client, and they're no longer a client, so I can tell this pretty safely. And so we were going to some of the graphics workstations, and we had unfettered access, and they said, yeah, just go ahead and do what you need to do, and if somebody sees that you're on, they're going to know that you're on. And we went to this one graphics station, and this guy, he was supposed to be working in InDesign or doing something in Photoshop. I logged on and I saw a Reddit webpage kind of come up on the screen, and he's like looking at some stuff and scrolling, and all of a sudden it dips down, and then all of a sudden Adobe comes back to the foreground. It's like somebody walked by his desk, and then a few minutes later Reddit comes back into view, and I just was like, I was hysterical. So yeah, sometimes you don't know what your employees are doing, your clients' employees, to sabotage your work sometimes, or even just drag down the network.
And then sometimes we make the assumption like our job is to keep things running really smoothly and fix everything. And, sometimes I find myself explaining to like an end user, hey, sorry, the network's down, we recommended this upgrade, and then, they never did it and blah, blah. And like, we're trying to justify like, hey, we're working on it. We're going to get you back up and running it very soon. Oh, I don't care. They're like, that's fine. I'm just reading, or whatever. Like they're happy to have the excuse not to be, like needing to get their job done or whatever. And there's other people, there's other end users sometimes who are annoyed, and they really do like just want to get their stuff done. So it's really funny, like when things stop working, you start to get a real sense for different people's personality. More feedback from Tim Hannon on a different topic. The show prior, I think, was where I mentioned that I've just occasionally seen this weird time machine issue. It was dutifully reported by Watchmen. In this case, I had ignored the first couple of alerts, and it got to the point where it had been like 51 days before, or since this machine had backed up. And it was like a machine that was low priority for me, one of my own. One day I just go in and to try to resolve it, and I'm expecting to find the external hard drive is unmounted, or the machine just needs a restart or something. But I connect and I see the hard drive is there, and okay, so why isn't it backing up? Let me just, I don't know, there's no error message. Let me just run a backup, backup now. And I'll run it, and I'm expecting to see an immediate error message, and instead it's like preparing backup. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. And I check it again a little while later, and it's like backup complete. It just backed up today as of whatever time. Well, then why didn't you just try it on your own? Like, why do you need me to come and run a manual backup? It's baffling to me. Tim wrote in to say that he's actually seen the same issue, doesn't have a specific fix or explanation, but it's something that Dr. Howard Oakley had reported on eclecticlight.co, the Eclectic Light Company blog, recent guest of ours on the show. He has 3 different posts about this. You can try using his tool, Constellation, and then there's another tool called T2M2, both of which are offered on the eclecticlight.co/downloads page. And we'll include links to these articles in the show notes as well, but he explores a little bit about why this might be happening and doesn't necessarily give a definitive fix. And I think the simplest solution is just restart regularly in case this happens to anybody else. And this leads you down a path of figuring out what a definitive fix might be. Check these out and report back to us if you do have this issue and if you find any solutions through exploring the Eclectic Light Company blog.
I have that same issue all the time. I've Max out there, and you just got to promise the time machine volume of beer, and then finally it works. And sometimes,
right.
Sometimes you get a power cycle, the actual time capsule. Other times you just need to reboot the machine. And sometimes if the time machine volume is so big, then it's in this preparing stage, and then you have to, set a little reminder to go back and check on it to see if it's made any progress or it's just stuck on preparing. Yeah, Apple's smart to get out of the business. There. Hopefully they'll keep on refining the time machine backup program because it has gotten better and more reliable. So kudos to Apple on that.
It's a darn good thing they have it. I'm glad the software is built in. It's a core function. I think it started in 10.5 or something like that. And it's kind of funny to think before then there was no built-in backup function. Like you just had to get your own and figure it out, by retrospect and set it up. So clearly it's something that needs to be built in. It's just funny that it sometimes has these issues that are totally inexplicable. Howard mentions on the blog that it could be related to like a launch debug or this thing called centralized task scheduling, different system processes that are related to like how these things get scheduled and run regularly. Specifically in this case where there's nothing actually stopping it from working. It just like stops trying to run. It speaks to the benefit of Watchman monitoring. If I didn't have that on there, I think I would walk around with a lot more just background anxiety if I didn't have Watchman monitoring on all the important machines in my fleet, because you'd be wondering about this in the background, right? Like what's not backing up? It's not reliable enough where it's just set it and forget it. You really do need something to kind of watch it for you.
Right. Agreed. And of course, there is the other possibility that you frequently tell your clients that the reason why this doesn't routinely back up is because Mercury is in retrograde. So there's that right. Excuse as well. So
that's like an automatic get out of jail free card for certain clients where you just, that just explains a lot. They want answers and there's like no answer. The answer is like, I don't know. How much do you want to pay me to try to figure it out? But can't you just be happy that it's solved,
So Joe, I've got a peeve, I've got a tip, and I've got a case to be made. What you pick? We're going to go through them all because hopefully we'll bang them out pretty quick. But do you pick the first one?
All right. I'd like to hear the peeve first.
Okay, the peeve. Do you have your iPhone in your possession?
I do.
Okay. So go to settings and go to cellular.
Okay.
And tell me once the applications populate in the mobile data list, are they alphabetized?
Good question. Okay, so it just finished loading. Okay, cellular data, right. Current period roaming, system services at the top. And then they're not alphabetized. I have them.
Why are they not alphabetized? I was driving in the car prepping for the show, and I had something that I was going to add to my own show notes in Evernote, and somehow mobile data in Evernote got switched off. And I'm like scrolling, looking for Evernote, I've got dozens of apps. Why are these not alphabetized?
Well, I think I have an easy answer for you.
I know,
you're going to tell me. Through this list.
Yeah, data consumption.
It's an order of data consumption, exactly. I don't know. Don't you think it's the right call or no?
No.
Fair enough. If you're looking at this and you're trying to refer to like why am I paying AT&T $500 this month? Right, what happened? Right. Okay, yes, it should be organized by data consumption. So I think for a lot of clients who are looking at this on their own, that would make sense. But I could see the point that there's also a chance you're looking at it for the exact reason you mentioned, where something's not working, and you want to check out why. I mean, that would be easier to have organized alphabetically. I mean, I could scroll. There's a lot of things I would miss here. It's a long list, You
should be able to have a little tap to filter by alphabetation. That's a new word I just made up.
Alphabetation, I like it.
Versus mobile data, right.
Mobile data. I want to insert one more thing in relation to that.
Is it a
just
peeve?
As an anecdote. It's not even, yes, it's actually a peeve. It's a peeve with the Apple Store. Not that ever comes up on the show. A former client of mine went to the Apple store with an iPhone having some supposed issues with her phone. A lot of it was user error in her case, but got some advice from somebody at the Apple store. Here's your problem right here. The reason that things are slow or whatever, or I'm sorry, it was the reason that her battery life was short was because all these things were turned on under cellular data. And that's your problem right there. You got to go through and turn all these things off. You can't have these things on all the time. And so she came back to us and she said, Apple told me that I shouldn't have all this stuff turned on. And I'm wondering why you guys didn't tell me that. I'm just like, we can't address that with that kind of adversarial sort of approach. But it just reminded me of that interaction where I was thinking to myself, I would love to explain that that advice from Apple is not good. I mean, maybe it would save some battery life, but don't you think paid a lot of money for this phone? It should pretty much be able to work in all these functions, even when you're on the road. That's kind of the whole point of it. I think that was lost on this particular client. So was it a gripe that was up next?
No, it was a tip and a case to be made. So my tip is we're going to talk a little bit about the Tidbits Content Network, which you can subscribe to. And we're big fans here at Command Control Power. And one of the tips I have is that most recently I've been more active with my Google My Business page. And somewhere along the way, I must have signed up for something or started to create some posts and said, yes, remind me to create new posts. So every week I get this nice little piece of email from Google My Business, and it says, keep sharing updates about your company. Create a new post with special deals, news, or updates to make your business stand out. So I said, all right, this is free. I'll play by your rules, Google. I've been putting up little tips from the Tidbits Content Network. It's great stuff. There's some shorter length articles that are created by the good folks over there. And so that's what I've been using my Tidbits Content Network for. And additionally, I've been adding some of the shorter stories to my Facebook page. So we're always trying to find content. What do we put on the Facebook business page? And these are just perfect examples of you using this not only for your newsletter, but using it in social media. Just another use case for the Tidbits Content Network.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And in fact, they include, I think, a little blurb that's suitable for Twitter, like nice and short with a link to more content. They really do make it as easy as possible for you to share this stuff with your audience. And you've found different ways to share it with several different audiences. So I think that's a really great tip for the listeners.
Now, here's my case to be made, Joe. And I know we've talked about this, and I know that both you and I use Ring Central for our businesses. But regardless of whatever service you're using, you're one of those guys who's pretty firm about not getting a client comfortable texting you and having any sort of text-driven conversation back and forth with a client. And I can't tell you how helpful texting has been doing scheduling, telling a client I'm running late. Maybe a client will reach out to me or I'll reach out to them with some sort of troubleshooting tip. Like, hey, got your email, I'm on site at a client, try this. And sometimes I can handle very quick fixes that I know that you don't normally charge for. And they can be really dealt with in a very efficient manner without having to deeply engage the client. It doesn't require you to open up your email and respond to the email or create a Zendesk ticket or whatever ticketing system you might use. And sometimes they're just like quick little things like, nope, you don't have to worry about that. I have found texting to be invaluable. Another place where I found texting to be really helpful is I have done some remote sessions where instead of getting on the phone with a client, getting dialogue back and forth with text can sometimes help facilitate a remote session. So I'm making another strong case to you, Joe, that I think you should reconsider texting as part of your business.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I will give my clients your cell phone number, and you can relay messages for me on a case by case basis.
They're texting. They're texting to the business number. They're not texting to my. They're going to my cell phone.
Right.
Because,
That's a good clarification because I was going to ask you that. You started off by saying that actually, now that I think about it, Ring Central, they do offer that functionality. We do have clients who text us to the Ring Central number. What gets tricky with it in our case is that we can't easily respond back from the Ring Central number. Each person in the company has their own extension with Ring Central. We're signing into the app using our extension. So there is an extension where the phone number associated is the main company phone number, but for everybody else, they have their own supposed phone number. And while we can change the caller ID to the main company number, so like, when Tim signs in on his phone to the Ring Central app and he's signing into extension whatever, his phone number, so to speak, would be like some crazy number that we don't even use, but he can change his caller ID to the main company number. And that's kind of the main reason to have this, is that we can make outgoing calls from our same company number. But that does not give us access to the text messages to, send or receive. So we can't easily reply back. We get the messages, we have it set up to deliver those text messages to us by email and also to actually forward to another cell phone number. Like I can get them by to my cell phone number. If I want to reply, it's not as easy. So what I will usually do is, because I get these text messages coming through my email, I'll just reply back. I'll remove some of the headers and stuff and just reply back to like the body of the essentially the text message. And then the client will get an email from me in response, and we kind of take it to email from there, because we can more easily share our email, copy people and things like that. For us, it's tricky, but I can see how for you that would really be a nice feature to have for the main Ring Central number.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see how it would be a mess if everybody was trying to text different technicians in your company and all the pieces of information were flying back and forth. Like was that for me or was that for somebody else,
Yeah, that's one problem, is the fact that we'd all be texting from the same phone number, but we can't even do that easily. We'd have to be signing into the same extension to be able to even send to and from the same company phone number. Even if we could do that, that would be tricky, because it would be like, is that for you or for me? Is somebody in the middle of a conversation here? What is this? You get these weird messages sometimes out of the blue. Like I got confirmation for somebody's dentist appointment last night, for like my daughter, and I don't have a daughter. So it's like, whatever. It's just like you get these things that then it's even another layer where you have to sort it out. Is this a reminder that's legitimate for one of you, or do we need to let them know that this is the wrong person?
Is there any way that you could actually make texting work in some fashion? I mean, probably you wouldn't be able to use Ring Central. For yourself, you'd probably need to have another business phone, I guess, and just make it exclusive for you.
Exactly. I have thought about that, where maybe with like our CyMac Prime service, we may want to give our clients who subscribe better access to us in some form. And maybe that would be like a special number, and that would be, they'd be able to text us there too. And I want to keep things as simple as possible. If we could have the ability to all share the text message thread across everybody's extension, but using the main company phone number, I think I would at least turn that feature on so we could have access to it. I'm not sure if I would encourage clients to use it, but we would then more easily be able to just use it if it like worked in a case-by-case basis. It is nice that they support texting. So the ability to forward the text message to email is nice. And I think that's good enough for us for now, just to be able to reply by email to a text.
Texting is pretty ubiquitous and pretty universal. I would think it would add a layer of efficiency to an operation. It's just like you say, the execution and the order of it.
Do you get people who fall into too much of the habit of the lazy texting kind of thing, where they don't even care what time it is? They just know that they have this open dialogue with you through text message, and they might fire it off at any hour of the day. And not only that, but like sometimes there's a certain casual aspect to texting where you get a lot of abbreviations. I mean, I sound like an old man now, but anyway, you get, people are like using a lot of shorthand and things, and I'm trying to decipher what they're talking about, and they're not fully explaining what the issue is. And like, then you're looking at it and you're like, I wonder what's going on. You start to formulate a response. And like, by the time you reply, they're like, oh, I restarted. It's fine. And it's even more along those lines of like, let me just fire off a text and see if anybody gets back to me. The barrier to entry is lower, maybe. Do you ever get that coming into play?
Not really. Not where it's become a problem. Easily I could see where that might, in fact, happen. But you just need to know when to shut it down. If it's after hours, you don't respond. If it is after hours, and you could avoid somebody calling you the next morning with some silly issue, and you know that you could give them the secret message that will make them happy, and sometimes you choose to do that. So I guess it's easier when you're a little footloose and fancy-free like I am with my army of one.
It's true. Things, certain aspects of running the business are just way more simple. So, it's kudos to you to be able to take advantage of these different things and not worry too much about the implementation details and design details.
Yeah, like broadcasting from my lap. I've got a mobile studio here. All I need is a chair. Nice.
Is that using the new iPad Pro by any chance?
You mean I don't need a MacBook Pro anymore, Joe? I could just do all my business work on an iPad Pro now? Is that what you're saying?
Work from your lap, that's it's the new lap. It's the lap without the laptop, I guess. I don't know.
Somebody in Cupertino's banging that drum. It's not me.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive that the hardware has come so far with these new iPads that they like rival some of the Macs in speed and capability, pure hardware sense. But there's just something about the form factor and obviously the software ecosystem that doesn't do it. I mean, even if you wanted to broadcast from your lap using an iPad, probably a way you could make it work. But based on our workflow now, there'd be a lot of shoehorns involved, I think.
Shoehorns and straitjackets, I think, all the way around.
And duct tape, and yeah, right.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I